My name is Dale Harmon. I bought 1,000 acres of farmland, and I didn't tell anyone what sat beneath it. Not because I was hiding anything, because no one asked. The HOA next door had been drawing water from a well that crossed onto my property for 11 years before I arrived. They had no easement, no agreement, no legal right. They just assumed the land was abandoned and helped themselves. That assumption cost them everything. This is the story of how Dale Harmon documented it, reported it, and watched the whole thing unravel slowly, legally, and completely. I spent 23 years working as a civil engineer. I specialized in land grading, drainage systems, and water infrastructure. I knew how water moved across property. I knew how rights were assigned, transferred, and contested. When I retired at 54, I had one goal. I wanted land. Not a subdivision lot with shared fences and community rules. I wanted something I could work with my own hands, manage on my own terms, and leave to my kids without strings attached. I found the property in early spring, 1,012 acres in a rural county, rolling terrain, a seasonal creek in the northeast corner, 2 natural springs, 160 acres of tillable soil. The rest was timber, brush, and open pasture. The asking price reflected its isolation. I paid cash. What I did not know, not yet, was that a planned residential community called Maplewood Estates bordered my western edge. 47 homes, a homeowners association with an elected board, and a water infrastructure problem they had quietly buried for over a decade. I took possession in April. The first 3 months were exactly what I had wanted. I woke early, walked the land, and started learning it. I brought in a surveyor in the second week. Standard practice for a parcel that size. I wanted certified boundary markers before I did anything else. That was training. That was habit. That was the decision that would matter most. Later the surveyor, a quiet man named Gerald, flagged something. On the third day he called me out to the western boundary line, just past a stand of old oak trees. There was a buried pipe, black poly tubing, maybe 2 inches in diameter, running from a shallow wellhead on my side of the line and crossing underground into the neighboring property. Gerald didn't editorialize. He marked it, photographed it, logged the GPS coordinates, and added it to the survey report. I stood there, looking at it for a long time. The wellhead was on my land. The pipe went west. That meant water was leaving my property without my permission, and without any recorded easement in the title search I had already completed. I didn't touch it. I didn't confront anyone. I went home, made coffee, and pulled out the county recorder documents I had collected at closing. I read them again slowly. There was no utility easement, no water rights transfer, no recorded agreement of any kind between my parcel and the adjoining HOA. I wrote the date in my notebook. I noted what Gerald had found. I noted that I had done nothing yet. I wanted that baseline in writing before anything else happened. The survey report came back fully certified 2 weeks later. Gerald had done thorough work. Every boundary marker was logged. Every GPS coordinate was confirmed. The wellhead location was documented with photographs, measurements, and a written note indicating no recorded easement existed for the pipe crossing my western boundary. I filed the report in a binder. I labeled it clearly. I made 2 copies. One stayed in my house. One went to my attorney, a land use lawyer named Patricia Cole, who had handled rural property disputes for 30 years. I didn't ask her to act yet. I just wanted her to have it. Patricia called me the same evening she received it. Her voice was measured. She said the situation was straightforward from a property rights standpoint. The pipe was on my land. The wellhead was on my land without a recorded easement. The HOA had no legal right to that water. She used the word trespass. She also used the word patience. She told me not to move yet. She said to keep watching. I followed that advice. In the 5th week of ownership, I walked the western tree line again. I brought a handheld GPS unit and a camera. I wanted my own photographic records separate from Gerald's professional survey. I photographed the wellhead from 4 angles. I photographed the pipe where it entered the ground. I photographed the boundary marker Gerald had placed with the wellhead visible in the same frame. timestamp on every image. I logged the coordinates manually in my notebook, alongside the photos. That same afternoon, a truck pulled up on the Maplewood Estate side of the fence line. 2 men got out. They wore no uniforms. They carried tools. They walked directly to a point about 30 feet inside the HOA property line, just on their side, and began inspecting something in the ground. A valve box, I later confirmed. They opened it, checked something, and closed it again. They did not cross onto my land. They did not acknowledge me standing 60 yards away. I noted the time. I noted the truck. White, no markings, a local contractor plate. I photographed it. I wrote everything down. When I got home, I did not approach them. I did not speak. I just watched. 3 days later, I received a letter. It was printed on Maplewood Estate's HOA letterhead. The return address listed a board president named Richard Thorne. The letter was brief. It welcomed me to the area. It mentioned that the community had historically relied on a shared water source near the property boundary, and expressed hope that I would continue to honor the existing arrangement. I read that letter 4 times. There was no mention of any legal agreement, no reference to an easement, no documentation attached, just the assumption stated plainly that I would continue allowing them to take water from my land, because that was how things had always been. I set the letter on my desk. I photographed it. I scanned it. I sent the scan to Patricia that same night, with a single line. They've acknowledged the pipe in writing, without citing any legal basis. Patricia replied within the hour. She said, "Save everything. Do not respond yet." So I didn't. Patricia's strategy was simple. Build the record first, respond second. She had seen cases like this before. Not identical, but similar. A neighbor has been using something. A road, a well, a drainage ditch, without permission. The neighbor assumes silence means consent. The longer the silence, the stronger their eventual adverse possession claim could theoretically become. But Patricia explained that adverse possession on a newly purchased property, where the new owner had already documented the encroachment within weeks of taking title, was extremely difficult to argue. I had moved fast enough. The survey was dated. The photographs were time-stamped. The HOA's own letter was now in my file. What I needed next was usage data. I needed to know how much water they were pulling from that well. I needed to know how long it had been happening. And I needed to know whether anyone in the chain of previous ownership had ever given verbal or written permission. I started with the county records office. I spent 2 full days there. I pulled the deed history on my parcel, going back 40 years. I pulled the recorded plat maps for Maplewood Estates. The subdivision had been developed 14 years ago. The HOA was incorporated 12 years ago. The wellhead on my property, according to an old county groundwater permit I found in the physical files, had been drilled 18 years ago, before the subdivision existed, by the previous owner of my land, a man named Elton Marsh. Elton Marsh had died 6 years ago. His estate had sold the parcel to a land-holding company. That company had sold it to me. I found no record of any easement granted to Maplewood Estates or its developer at any point in that chain, not in the deed transfers, not in the plat filings, not in the county utility records. I photographed every relevant document. I logged every file number. I organized everything chronologically. Then I tracked down Elton Marsh's daughter. Her name was found in the probate records. She still lived in the county about 20 meters east. I drove out on a Tuesday morning and knocked on her door. I introduced myself as Dale Harmon, the new owner of her father's land. I was polite. I asked if she knew anything about the well on the western edge of the property. She knew immediately what I was referring to. She said her father had complained about it near the end of his life. She said the subdivision developer had approached him years ago, asking to tap into the well temporarily during construction. Her father had said no. They had done it anyway. By the time Elton realized the pipe was still running, he was ill and had no energy to fight it. He had mentioned it to her. She had no documents, but she was willing to write a signed statement describing what her father had told her. I thanked her. I asked if she would be willing to speak with my attorney. She said yes, without hesitation. I drove home and called Patricia. I told her what I had found. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "Dale, they built that subdivision on stolen water." I said, "I know." She said, "Now we build the case." Patricia took Elton Marsh's daughter's statement in her office the following week. The woman, whose name was Carol, sat across the table and spoke clearly and without emotion. She described her father's account in detail. The developer had come to him twice, first to ask permission, then to say the connection was only temporary. Elton had refused both times. Carol remembered the second conversation specifically because her father had been angry afterward, which was unusual for him. He was not a man who showed anger often. Patricia had a paralegal transcribe the statement. Carol signed it. Patricia notarized it. That document went into the growing file, alongside the survey, the photographs, the county records, and the HOA's own letter. I want to be clear about something. At this point, I had not disrupted anything. The pipe was still running. The HOA was still drawing water. I had not threatened anyone. I had not made demands. I was simply collecting what existed. Facts, documents, signatures. I was doing what any careful person would do before taking any action that could not be undone. But the HOA was not standing still either. Richard Thorne, the board president, sent a second letter in the 7th week. This one had a different tone. The welcoming language was gone. He wrote that the board had become aware that I had been conducting surveys near the community's water infrastructure. He wrote that any interference with that infrastructure would be considered a hostile act and would result in immediate legal action. He referenced the community's 47 families. He used the phrase, long-established community resource. He did not cite a single legal document. I photographed the letter. I scanned it. I sent it to Patricia. Patricia called me that evening. She was calm, but I could hear something sharper underneath it. She said, "Thorne's letter had just made things significantly easier for us." He had now put in writing that he considered the well to be community infrastructure on my land, without any legal basis for that claim. He had also implicitly threatened me with legal action for activity I had every right to conduct on my own property. She said that letter was going to be very useful. I asked her if it was time to respond. She said not yet. She said she wanted one more thing first. She wanted a water usage assessment. She wanted to know exactly how much water was moving through that pipe and what it was worth. I hired a licensed hydrologist named Marcus Webb. He came out on a Thursday with flow measurement equipment. We accessed the wellhead together. Marcus installed a temporary inline flow meter entirely on my property, entirely within my legal rights. He let it run for 72 hours. The numbers were recorded and logged automatically. When Marcus pulled his data, the results were significant. The well was producing approximately 18,000 gallons per day, all of it flowing west into Maplewood Estates. At the county's published agricultural water rate, that volume had a measurable annual value. Marcus put it in a formal report with his license number, his methodology, and his signature. I added it to the binder. The binder was getting thick now. Marcus Webb's report changed the financial picture entirely. 18,000 gallons per day over 11 years, the approximate time Maplewood Estates had been operating. That number compounded into something substantial. Patricia had her paralegal run the calculations using conservative figures, county water rates, standard agricultural pricing. Even at the lowest applicable rate, the unauthorized water usage over that period represented a significant monetary value. Patricia would not give me an exact number until she had cross-referenced it with a second source. But she told me the figure was large enough to matter in court. I sat with that information for a few days. I want to explain something about how I was thinking during this period. I was not angry. That might seem strange given what I was uncovering, but anger would have been a distraction. What I felt was something closer to clarity. Every document I collected, every number Marcus recorded, every page Patricia filed, all of it was moving in one direction, toward a complete and undeniable picture of what had happened on that land. I had no need to rush it. In the 9th week, something shifted on the HOA's side. A man knocked on my door on a Saturday morning. He introduced himself as Gary Piesel. He said he was a Maplewood Estates homeowner and a member of the HOA board. He was not Richard Thorne. He seemed uncomfortable. He stood on my porch with his hands in his jacket pockets and said he wanted to talk neighbor to neighbor. I invited him inside. I offered coffee. He accepted. Gary told me that the board was aware of the situation with the well. He said not all board members agreed with how Thorne was handling it. He said some residents were concerned. He spoke carefully like a man who knew he was on uncertain ground. He asked me directly what I intended to do. I told him the truth. I said I had no intention of doing anything reckless. I said I believed in following proper legal process. I said I was still in the information gathering phase and had made no decisions yet. He nodded slowly. He asked if there was any possibility of working something out. An easement perhaps, a payment arrangement, something that would give the community legal standing going forward. I told him that was a conversation worth having once the full picture was clear. I told him I would need everything in writing. I told him any arrangement would need to go through my attorney. He thanked me. He left his phone number. He left looking slightly more relieved than when he had arrived. I called Patricia immediately after he left. I told her about the visit. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said two things. First, she said Gary Piesel's visit confirmed the HOA knew they had no legal ground. Second, she said I should not negotiate anything yet, not because an easement was off the table permanently, but because we were not done building the record. She said, Dale, when the other side starts sending informal envoys, it means they are starting to worry. Let them worry a little longer. I wrote down the date and time of Gary's visit. I wrote down everything he had said. I added it to the binder. Patricia scheduled a formal case review meeting in her office at the start of the 3rd month. She wanted everything laid out on a table so we could assess where the gaps were. I arrived with the binder. She had her own file. Her paralegal sat in the corner with a notepad. We went through everything methodically. The certified survey with Gerald's boundary markers and wellhead coordinates. The time-stamped photographs. The county deed history going back 40 years. The groundwater permit showing Elton Marsh had drilled the well 18 years ago. The plat maps from Maplewood Estates. Carol's signed and notarized statement about her father's refusal. Richard Thorne's 2 letters. Marcus Webb's hydrological flow report with 72 hours of recorded data. Gary Piesel's informal visit, documented in my handwritten notes. Patricia reviewed each item carefully. She made notes in the margins of her own copy. When she finished, she leaned back and said, "We were in strong shape, but not complete shape." She identified 3 remaining gaps. First, she wanted official county confirmation that no easement existed. Not just the absence of one in the deed records, but a formal written response from the county recorder's office stating that no utility easement, water rights transfer, or recorded agreement of any kind had been filed between the 2 parcels. She wanted that on official letterhead. Second, she wanted the HOA's own governing documents, their CC&Rs, their board meeting minutes going back as far as possible, and any internal communications referencing the well. She said if they had ever discussed the water situation in a board meeting, those minutes were potentially discoverable. She filed a formal written request that same week under the state's Homeowner Association Records Disclosure Statute. HOAs in our state were required by law to provide certain records upon written request from an affected party. Patricia argued I qualified as an affected party given the documented encroachment. Third, she wanted a professional property appraisal that specifically addressed the impact of the unauthorized water usage on my land's assessed value and water rights valuation. She had an appraiser she trusted. His name was Howard Finch. She said Howard had testified as an expert witness in water rights cases before. I left her office with a task list. I drove to the county recorder's office the following morning, and made the formal written request for confirmation of easement status. The clerk told me it would take 10 to 15 business days. I used those days productively. I walked the full western boundary again with my GPS unit, this time mapping every point where the pipe might surface or connect to secondary lines on the HOA side. I found 2 additional valve access points just inside the HOA fence line. I photographed them from my side of the boundary. I did not cross. I logged every coordinate. I also began keeping a daily log. Every morning I noted the date, the weather, and any activity I observed near the boundary. Most days there was nothing to note. That was fine. A log with no entries was still a log. It showed consistent observation. It showed I was paying attention from the beginning. Howard Finch came out in the 4th week of the documentation phase. He spent a full day on the property. He reviewed the survey. He inspected the wellhead. He reviewed Marcus Webb's flow data. He walked the boundary. He took his own photographs. He said he would have a written appraisal report within 3 weeks. I made coffee when we got back to the farmhouse. Howard sat at my kitchen table and looked at the binder. He flipped through it slowly without saying much. Then he closed it and looked at me. He said, "Dale, whoever advised you to document everything from day one saved you a significant amount of trouble." I told him it was my attorney's advice. He nodded. He said, "Good attorney." The county recorder's office responded in 12 business days. The letter arrived on official letterhead, signed by the county recorder herself. It stated clearly and without qualification that no utility easement, no water rights transfer, no recorded license agreement, and no encumbrance of any kind had been filed between my parcel and the Maplewood Estates Development or its HOA at any point in the recorded history of either property. The letter cited the specific parcel identification numbers for both properties. It cited the date range searched. It was thorough and unambiguous. Then I walked inside, photographed it, scanned it, and called Patricia. She asked me to read the key paragraph aloud. I did. She said, "That is exactly what we needed. File it." I filed it in the binder behind a fresh tab labeled County Confirmation. The HOA's response to Patricia's records request came 10 days later. It was incomplete. They provided a copy of their CCNRs and 2 years of board meeting minutes. Patricia had requested 5 years minimum. She sent a follow-up letter citing the specific statute and the required scope of disclosure. She gave them 14 days to comply fully or face a disclosure violation complaint with the state HOA regulatory office. They complied reluctantly. The full response arrived in a large envelope. Patricia's paralegal went through it first. She flagged several items and called me to come into the office. I sat across from Patricia as she walked me through what the minutes contained. In the 2nd year of the HOA's operation, there was a board meeting entry that referenced the well directly. The minutes recorded a motion to formally approach the landowner, Elton Marsh, at that time, to establish a legal easement. The motion had passed 4-1, but the follow-up action item listed in the next meeting's minutes showed only this easement pursuit tabled indefinitely. They had known. The board had formally acknowledged 11 years ago that they needed a legal easement. They had voted to pursue one, and then they had done nothing. They had simply continued using the water and hoped no one would ever press the issue. Patricia set the papers down and looked at me steadily. She said those minutes were the single most important document in the file because they proved knowledge, not innocent assumption, not an honest mistake. The board had known they had no legal right to that water and had consciously chosen to table the issue rather than resolve it. I asked her what that meant legally. She said it significantly weakened any good faith defense they might attempt. It also strengthened a claim for damages. A party that knowingly continues an unauthorized activity is treated differently under the law than one acting in genuine ignorance. Howard Finch delivered his appraisal report at the end of that week. His conclusion regarding water rights valuation was precise, based on the documented flow volume, the duration of unauthorized usage, and the applicable county water rights framework. He assessed the fair market value of the water taken without authorization at a figure that made the room feel very quiet when Patricia read it aloud. I will not state the exact number here. What I will say is that it was large enough that Patricia recommended we send a formal legal notice before taking any further steps. She said the number alone, presented correctly, might resolve everything without a courtroom. I told her to prepare the notice. She said she would need 1 week. I told her to take whatever time she needed. I wanted it done right. The binder now had 4 tabbed sections and over 90 individual documents. Every page dated, every photograph time-stamped, every signature notarized where required. It was the most organized file I had ever assembled outside of a professional engineering project. That felt appropriate. This was, in its own way, an engineering problem, a structure built document by document, load-bearing evidence stacked carefully until it could hold whatever weight came next. Patricia sent the formal legal notice on a Monday morning. It was delivered by certified mail with return receipt requested. A copy went to Richard Thorne as HOA board president. A copy went to the HOA's registered legal agent on file with the state. A copy went to the property management company that administered Maplewood Estates on the board's behalf. The notice was 8 pages. Patricia had written it precisely. It identified the parties. It described the encroachment in full. It cited the survey, the county confirmation letter, the hydrological report, and Howard Finch's appraisal. It referenced the HOA's own board meeting minutes from 11 years ago, the ones showing they had formally acknowledged the need for an easement, and then deliberately done nothing. It stated the total assessed value of unauthorized water usage over the documented period, and it presented 3 options. Option 1. The HOA could negotiate a formal paid easement agreement with fair compensation for historical usage, subject to terms acceptable to me and reviewed by both parties' attorneys. Option 2. The HOA could cease all water usage from the well immediately, remove the pipe infrastructure from my property at their expense within 60 days, and pay a reduced settlement figure for historical unauthorized usage. Option 3. If no response was received within 30 days, Patricia would file suit in county civil court seeking full damages plus attorney fees, plus injunctive relief. The return receipt came back, signed 4 days later. They had received it. The clock was running for the first 10 days. There was silence. No call, no letter, no response of any kind. I continued my daily log. I continued my boundary walks. I noted that the pipe was still running. I noted it every single day. On the 11th day, Richard Thorne called my personal cell phone. I do not know how he obtained the number. I let it ring. He left a voicemail. His tone was not what I expected. He was not apologetic. He was not conciliatory. He was aggressive. He said I was threatening the water security of 47 families. He said I had moved onto the land and immediately began looking for ways to cause problems. He said the community had rights that predated my ownership and that his attorney would be in touch. I saved the voicemail. I transcribed it word for word in my notebook with the date and time. I sent the transcription and the audio file to Patricia the same evening. Patricia called me the next morning. She said Thorne's voicemail had just added harassment to the file. She said his claim that community rights predated my ownership was legally meaningless without a recorded easement, and that he almost certainly knew that. She said his attorney, whoever it was, would likely advise him to stop making unsolicited calls immediately. The HOA's attorney made contact 4 days later. His name was Brett Calloway. He sent a letter to Patricia's office. I never spoke to him directly. Patricia handled all communication from that point forward. She summarized his letter for me in a phone call. Calloway had taken the aggressive posture his client preferred. He argued that the well usage constituted an implied easement through long-term continuous use. He argued that the previous landowner's inaction amounted to tacit consent. He argued that disrupting the water supply would cause irreparable harm to the community. He requested a 60-day extension to the response deadline. Patricia denied the extension. She sent her response within 48 hours. She addressed each argument directly. Implied easement requires open, continuous, hostile, and exclusive use under a claim of right. and the HOA's own minutes showed they knew they had no right, which destroyed the hostile and claim of right elements. Elton Marsh's inaction was not tacit consent, because inaction by a landowner does not create an easement without additional legal elements, none of which were present here, and the irreparable harm argument cut both ways. My property rights were also being irreparably harmed every day. The unauthorized usage continued. She closed her response with a single line. The 30-day deadline remained in effect. Brett Calloway went quiet for 9 days after Patricia's response. I assumed he was reassessing. Patricia assumed the same. She told me that when an opposing attorney goes quiet after an aggressive opening, it usually means one of two things. Either they are preparing a more serious legal challenge, or they went back to their client with an honest assessment, and the client did not like what they heard. In this case, it turned out to be the second one. Gary Purcell called me on a Thursday evening. He identified himself immediately. He apologized for calling directly and said he understood if I preferred to route everything through attorneys. I told him I was listening. He said there was significant division on the board. He said Thorne was pushing hard for full litigation, but that 3 other board members were not willing to take that path. He said the honest financial reality was that Maplewood Estates did not have the reserves to fund a prolonged legal battle. Their HOA dues collections were already strained. A major legal expense would require a special assessment on all 47 homeowners. That was not a popular option. I thanked Gary for the information. I told him again that everything needed to go through Patricia. He said he understood. He said he just wanted me to know that not everyone on that board was Richard Thorne. I documented the call. I sent the notes to Patricia 2 days before the 30-day deadline expired. Calloway sent a new letter. The tone had shifted completely. The aggressive legal posturing was gone. He wrote that his client was prepared to engage in good faith negotiations toward a formal easement agreement, and that they were open to discussing reasonable compensation for historical usage. He requested a negotiation meeting within the following 2 weeks. Patricia called me after reading it. She said, "Dale, they blinked." She recommended we agree to the meeting, but on our terms. She proposed that the meeting take place in her office. She proposed that both attorneys be present. She proposed that the HOA bring their full financial disclosure, reserves, annual budget, due structure, so we could assess what a realistic settlement figure looked like. Calloway agreed to all 3 conditions within 24 hours. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks out. I spent those 2 weeks doing one additional thing Patricia had suggested. She wanted a formal written opinion from a second water rights attorney, someone outside her firm, confirming the strength of our legal position. First, it would give us an independent confirmation we could reference in negotiations. Second, if Thorne tried to argue in the meeting that our case was weaker than we claimed, we could produce a second attorney's written opinion saying otherwise. I hired a water rights specialist named Daniel Cross from a firm in the state capital. He reviewed the full file over 4 days. His written opinion was 6 pages. His conclusion was unambiguous. The encroachment was clear. The documentation was thorough. The HOA's implied easement defense was very unlikely to succeed, given the board minutes showing prior knowledge. He assessed our litigation position as strong. I added his opinion to the binder. The binder now required a second volume. On the Monday before the negotiation meeting, Richard Thorne sent one final letter directly to my mailing address, bypassing both attorneys entirely. It was 2 paragraphs. He wrote that I was destroying a community. He wrote that families depended on that water. He wrote that a decent person would simply grant the easement without demanding compensation for something that had never harmed me. I read it once. I photographed it. I filed it. I did not respond. The next morning, I drove to Patricia's office. I set both binder volumes on her conference table. I sat down. I drank my coffee. I waited for Tuesday. The negotiation meeting began at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Patricia's conference room was clean and quiet. I sat on one side of the table with Patricia beside me. Across from us sat Brett Calloway and two people he introduced as Richard Thorne and the HOA's property manager, a woman named Sandra Vale. Gary Purcell was not present. I noted that. Calloway opened with a prepared statement. He said his client recognized the property boundary situation and was committed to resolving it amicably. He used the word amicably 3 times in the first 5 minutes. He said the community had 47 families who had based their lives around Maplewood Estates in good faith. He said those families deserved consideration in any resolution. He said the HOA was prepared to negotiate a formal easement and modest historical compensation. The word modest told me everything I needed to know about where they were starting. Then she opened the first binder volume and placed Howard Finch's appraisal report in the center of the table. She slid it across to Calloway. She gave him 60 seconds to read the summary page. Then she placed Daniel Cross's independent legal opinion beside it. Then she placed the county recorder's confirmation letter. Then the board meeting minutes from 11 years ago showing the tabled easement motion. She did not narrate any of it. She simply placed each document on the table and waited. Thorne's expression changed as the documents accumulated. He had seen some of them before through the legal notice, but seeing them physically stacked on a conference table in front of him was different. Sandra Vale leaned over and whispered something to Calloway. He nodded slightly without looking at her. Patricia spoke first. She said, "We were not negotiating the existence of the encroachment that was established. We were negotiating resolution terms." She outlined 3 components. First, a formal recorded easement with annual payment terms reflecting fair market water value going forward. Second, a historical compensation figure based on Howard Finch's appraisal for the 11 years of unauthorized usage. Third, full reimbursement of my documented legal costs to date. Thorne spoke before Calloway could. He said the historical compensation figure was unreasonable. He said the HOA could not pay that amount without bankrupting the community. He said I was punishing innocent homeowners for decisions made before most of them even moved in. I let him finish. Then I spoke for the first time in the meeting. I said I understood that the current homeowners had not made the original decision. I said that was genuinely unfortunate. But I said that the HOA as a legal entity was responsible for its ongoing obligations, regardless of membership changes. I said the pipe had been running every day since I took ownership. Every day was a continued choice. Thorne started to respond. Calloway put a hand on his arm. Thorne stopped. Calloway asked for a recess. Patricia agreed to 15 minutes. Thorne and Calloway stepped into the hallway. Sandra Vale stayed in her seat and looked at the documents on the table. She did not touch them. She looked at them the way a person looks at something they wish they had known about sooner. Patricia leaned close to me during the recess and spoke quietly. She said Thorne was going to come back with a counter that was still too low. She said to let her handle the response. She said the important thing was to stay in the room and not agree to anything today. She said we were not here to close a deal. We were here to show them the full weight of what they were facing. I nodded. I refilled my coffee from the car on the side table. I sat back down. I waited. Thorne and Calloway returned after 20 minutes. Calloway presented a counter. It was roughly 30% of Howard Finch's historical compensation figure. The easement payment going forward was framed as a flat annual fee, a number so low it did not reflect actual water market value by any reasonable measure. Legal cost reimbursement was refused entirely. Patricia did not react visibly. She wrote the numbers down on her notepad. She asked Calloway to confirm the figures on the record. He did. She thanked him. Then she closed her notepad and said we would respond in writing within 5 business days. Thorne looked surprised. He had expected a counter-negotiation. He had expected us to haggle. Patricia gave him nothing to push against. We gathered the documents, shook hands across the table, and left. In the parking lot, Patricia told me the counter was insulting but useful. She said their number told us they still believed they had negotiating leverage. She said the next step was to remove that belief entirely. She filed the lawsuit 4 days later. The filing was precise: trespass, unauthorized extraction of a natural resource, unjust enrichment spanning 11 years, injunctive relief to halt ongoing water usage, full damages per Howard Finch's appraisal, attorney fees. The complaint attached every key document as an exhibit: Gerald's survey, the county confirmation letter, Marcus Webb's flow data, Howard Finch's appraisal, Daniel Cross's legal opinion, Carol's signed statement, the HOA's own board minutes showing prior knowledge, Thor's letters, even the voicemail transcription. It was 41 pages, every exhibit numbered and indexed. The courthouse filing was public record. That mattered. Anyone could walk in and read it. Someone did. A local journalist named Kendra Mills covered county court filings as part of her beat for the regional newspaper. She pulled our complaint 3 days after it was filed. She called Patricia's office requesting comment. Patricia declined on my behalf, but confirmed the filing was accurate and the documents were authentic. Kendra published a short piece the following Thursday. She did not editorialize. She reported the facts as they appeared in the public filing. A retired engineer named Dale Harmon had purchased farmland and discovered a neighboring HOA had been drawing water from a well on his property for over a decade without legal authorization. A lawsuit had been filed. The HOA had not responded to her request for comment. The piece was 4 paragraphs. It ran in the print edition and on the newspaper's website. By the following Monday, it had been shared significantly on local community social media pages. People were reading it. Maplewood Estates homeowners were reading it. Many of them were learning for the first time that their water came from a well they had no legal right to use. Gary P. Seal called me that Monday evening. He sounded exhausted. He said the community Facebook group was in chaos. He said homeowners were demanding answers from the board. He said Thorne had posted a statement calling the lawsuit frivolous and claiming the matter was being handled. Several homeowners had publicly asked him to produce the legal documentation proving their water rights. He had not responded to those posts. I thanked Gary. I documented the call. I added it to Volume 2. The newspaper article was a small stone dropped in still water. The ripples moved faster than I expected. By the second week after publication, 3 separate Maplewood Estates homeowners had contacted Patricia's office independently. They were not hostile. They were frightened. They wanted to understand what the lawsuit meant for their property values. They wanted to know if their homes could lose water service. Patricia could not advise them directly. They were not her clients. But she confirmed the lawsuit was real and the documents were public record. One homeowner, a woman named Diane, had lived in Maplewood Estates for 8 years. She told Patricia's receptionist that she had never been informed about any water rights issue when she purchased her home. She said her real estate disclosure documents had made no mention of it. She asked if that was something she should be concerned about. Patricia flagged that call for me immediately, because Diane had just introduced a dimension we had not yet fully explored. If the HOA had known about the water rights problem for 11 years, as their own board minutes proved, and had failed to disclose it to homeowners during property transactions, that was a separate and serious issue. It potentially implicated the HOA board, the property management company, and possibly individual real estate transactions. Patricia said she was not going to chase that thread herself. It was outside our case, but she said it was worth noting because it added external pressure on the HOA that we had not created and did not need to manage. The pressure was building from multiple directions. Now, the lawsuit was filed, the article had run, homeowners were asking questions the board could not answer cleanly, and the HOA's legal costs were accumulating. Callaway was not a cheap attorney. Richard Thorne made his first public mistake in the 3rd week. He posted a lengthy statement on the community's official HOA website. I was sent a screenshot by Gary Peasell the morning it went up. Thorne's statement claimed that Dale Harmon had purchased the neighboring land specifically to target the community. He claimed the lawsuit was a predatory legal strategy designed to extract money from working families. He called it an abuse of the court system. He said the HOA's legal team was confident the case would be dismissed. Not one sentence of that statement was accurate, and it was now publicly posted under the official HOA letterhead. I forwarded the screenshot to Patricia. She read it and called me within the hour. She said Thorne had just potentially defamed me in a public statement using the HOA's official platform. She said we were going to document it, preserve it, and decide later whether to add it to our claims. She had her paralegal take a full timestamped screenshot with the URL. She sent Callaway a letter that afternoon, formally notifying him that his client had made public statements we considered defamatory, and that we reserved all rights. Callaway's response arrived the next morning. It was 2 sentences. He said the statement reflected his client's opinion and was protected speech. Patricia filed his response in the binder and said nothing further about it. For now, the HOA's annual general meeting was scheduled for the last Saturday of that month. Gary Persgall told me about it in a brief call midweek. He said attendance was going to be unusually high. Homeowners who had never attended a single meeting in years were planning to show up. He said the mood in the community was not good. I did not attend. It was not my meeting, but Gary called me that same evening after it ended. He spoke for 20 minutes. I listened and took notes. He said over 30 homeowners had shown up. The normal attendance was 8 or 9. Thorne had opened the meeting with his prepared talking points. He called the lawsuit baseless. He said Callaway was confident. He said the community's water access was not at risk. He said everything was under control. Then a homeowner named Paul stood up. Paul had apparently done his own research. He had pulled the court filing from public records himself and read the full complaint. He stood up and asked Thorne directly to produce the legal documentation proving Maplewood Estates had a recorded easement for the well. Thorne said the documentation was being handled by legal counsel and could not be shared publicly during active litigation. Paul then read aloud from the HOA's own board minutes, the entry from 11 years ago showing the tabled easement motion. He had found them in the disclosure documents Patricia had compelled the HOA to produce. He asked Thorne why the board had voted to pursue an easement 11 years ago and never followed through. Thorne said those minutes were being taken out of context. 3 other homeowners stood up and asked variations of the same question. The meeting reportedly became loud, not violent, just loud and uncomfortable. Thorne ended the meeting early. Several homeowners left without the answers they came for. Gary said Sandra Vale, the property manager, had looked deeply uncomfortable throughout. He said even some board members who had previously supported Thorne were visibly unsettled by the questions they could not answer. The following week, Kendra Mills published a second article. This one was longer. She had obtained a copy of the court filing independently and had now read it thoroughly. She reported on the board minutes, specifically the tabled easement vote from 11 years ago. She quoted the minutes directly as a matter of public record. She also reported that multiple homeowners had raised concerns about disclosure at the annual meeting. She reached Thorne for comment this time. He told her the matter was in the hands of legal counsel. That quote ran in the article under his name. The second article traveled further than the first. It was picked up by 2 regional news aggregator websites. The comment sections were active. People who had no connection to Maplewood Estates were reading it and forming opinions. Patricia called me after the second article ran. She said external pressure was now doing work we did not have to do ourselves. She said the HOA's internal unity was fracturing. She said Callaway had contacted her office requesting an urgent call. She took the call. Callaway asked if we were open to renewed settlement discussions before the court date. Patricia told him we were open to one conversation. She told him to come with a serious number this time. He said he would. Callaway's serious number was better than his first offer. It was not good enough. Patricia rejected it in writing within 24 hours and confirmed our court date was proceeding. The date was 6 weeks out. We had work to do. Patricia began formal trial preparation immediately. She outlined what the courtroom presentation needed to accomplish. Not just win, but win cleanly. She wanted the judge to have no ambiguity about any element of the case. She wanted every document introduced as a formal exhibit. She wanted every expert witness prepared and rehearsed. Gerald, the surveyor, was first. Patricia met with him twice. He was comfortable with courtroom testimony. He had testified in boundary disputes before. His survey methodology was sound and fully documented. Patricia had him prepare a clear visual exhibit, a scaled diagram of the western boundary, showing the wellhead location, the pipe route, and the boundary markers. Simple enough for a non-engineer to understand immediately. Marcus Webb prepared a condensed version of his flow report for courtroom presentation. Patricia wanted the water volume numbers presented visually. Marcus produced a one-page chart showing daily flow, monthly accumulation, and 11-year total volume. Clean numbers, no technical language a layperson could not follow. Howard Finch reviewed his appraisal and prepared a verbal summary. Patricia could walk him through on the stand. She rehearsed the examination with him twice in her office. Howard was experienced with testimony. He stayed precise and did not embellish. Daniel Cross agreed to appear as a second legal opinion witness. His role was to confirm the strength of the trespass and unjust enrichment claims from an independent water rights perspective. Carol Elton Marsh's daughter agreed to testify. Patricia prepared her carefully. Her testimony was not about legal expertise. It was about human reality. She would tell the court what her father had told her, that he had said no twice, and that they had done it anyway. I spent those 6 weeks reviewing every document in both binder volumes. I knew the file completely. Patricia said I would not need to testify extensively. The documents spoke clearly enough, but she wanted me prepared for cross-examination by Calloway. She ran 3 mock sessions in her office. Calloway would try to paint me as an opportunist, someone who had purchased land specifically to exploit a vulnerable community. Patricia wanted me ready for that framing without becoming defensive or emotional. I was not worried about that because the truth was simple. I had bought land. I had surveyed it. I had found an encroachment. I had documented it carefully. I had offered to negotiate. They had refused reasonable terms. Everything after that was their choice. 2 weeks before the court date, something unexpected happened. Sandra Vale resigned as property manager for Maplewood Estates. No public statement. Gary PCEL heard through a board contact that she had retained her own attorney separately. He did not know why. Patricia said it was possible. Sandra was distancing herself from potential liability, connected to the disclosure issues Diane and other homeowners had raised. We did not chase it. We noted it and stayed focused on our case. 1 week before the court date, Calloway made a final settlement approach. This time, the number was within a reasonable range of Howard Finch's figure. Patricia presented it to me without recommendation. She said the choice was mine. I could settle and resolve it privately, or I could go to court and let the record become fully public and permanent. I thought about it for 1 evening. Then I called Patricia and told her we were going to court. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lighting, rows of fixed seats behind the bar. Patricia and I sat at the plaintiff's table with both binder volumes stacked neatly to one side. Calloway and Thorne sat across from us. Thorne wore a suit that looked recently purchased. He sat straight and kept his expression composed, but his hands on the table were not completely still. The judge was a woman named Honorable Claire Sutton. She had been on the county bench for 16 years. Patricia had appeared before her twice previously. She described her as methodical, patient, and intolerant of anything that wasted her time. Judge Sutton opened proceedings and asked both sides to summarize their positions. Patricia went first. She was concise. She stated that Dale Harmon owned the land. No easement existed. The HOA had drawn water without authorization for 11 years. Their own documents proved they knew. We were seeking damages and injunctive relief. Calloway followed. He argued implied easement through continuous long-term use. He argued community reliance and good faith. He argued that disrupting established water infrastructure would cause disproportionate harm. Judge Sutton listened to both without expression. Then she asked Calloway one question. She asked him to identify the specific recorded document establishing the HOA's legal right to access the well. Calloway said the right had been established through use rather than recording. Judge Sutton wrote something on her notepad and said nothing further. That exchange lasted 90 seconds. It told me everything about how the day was going to go. Gerald testified first. He walked the court through the survey with his scaled boundary diagram as a visual exhibit. He confirmed the wellhead coordinates. He confirmed the pipe crossing. He confirmed no easement markers existed anywhere along the boundary. Calloway's cross-examination lasted 4 minutes. He had nothing to challenge in Gerald's methodology. Marcus Webb followed. He presented his flow data chart. 18,000 gallons per day. He walked through his methodology clearly. Calloway tried to challenge the measurement duration, 72 hours, as insufficient for a reliable estimate. Marcus explained that industry standard for baseline flow measurement was 48 hours minimum, and that his 72-hour reading was conservative. Judge Sutton asked Marcus if the daily figure could reasonably vary significantly. Marcus said variation would be minimal, given consistent aquifer pressure. She nodded and wrote on her notepad again. Howard Finch took the stand after lunch. Patricia walked him through the appraisal methodology carefully. He explained water rights valuation. He explained how he had applied county rates to the documented volume over the 11-year period. He stated his final figure clearly and without hesitation. Calloway challenged his rate assumptions on cross-examination. Howard had anticipated every challenge. He had alternative calculations using 3 different rate methodologies. All 3 produced figures within 15% of each other. His number held. Carol testified in the afternoon. She was composed. She spoke about her father quietly and directly. She described his refusal. She described watching him become too ill to fight something he had clearly wanted to fight. There was no drama in her delivery. That made it more effective. Calloway's cross-examination was brief and careful. He knew better than to press a grieving daughter too hard in front of a judge. Daniel Cross confirmed the legal framework. Trespass established, unjust enrichment established, implied easement defense unsupported, given the board minutes showing prior knowledge and conscious inaction. Then Patricia introduced the board minutes as a formal exhibit. She read the relevant entry aloud for the court record. The motion to pursue an easement passed 4-1, tabled indefinitely at the next meeting. She paused after reading it. She did not editorialize. She simply said, "Your Honor, the defendant's own records confirm they knew." Thorne testified last for the defense. Calloway walked him through a prepared narrative about community reliance and good faith assumptions, but Judge Sutton interrupted twice during his testimony to ask pointed clarifying questions. Once about why the board had tabled the easement motion, once about why no disclosure had been made to incoming homeowners. Thorne's answers were vague. Judge Sutton wrote extensively on her notepad during his responses. Closing arguments were brief on both sides. Patricia closed with a single clear statement. The law did not require Dale Harmon to be harmed visibly for a property rights violation to exist. The violation was the taking itself, 11 years of it, documented completely. Judge Sutton said she would deliver her written ruling within 30 days. Judge Sutton's written ruling arrived on a Thursday morning. Patricia called me before I had finished my first cup of coffee. She read the key findings aloud over the phone. I sat at my kitchen table and listened without interrupting. The judge ruled in our favor on every count. Trespass was established. Unauthorized extraction of a natural resource was established. Unjust enrichment was established. The implied easement defense was rejected completely. Judge Sutton cited the board minutes directly in her ruling. She wrote that a party cannot claim good faith reliance when their own internal records demonstrate prior knowledge of an unresolved legal deficiency. That sentence alone dismantled the HOA's entire defense in one paragraph. Damages were awarded at 92% of Howard Finch's appraised figure. Attorney fees were awarded in full. Injunctive relief was granted. The HOA was ordered to cease all water usage from the well within 45 days and to remove all pipe infrastructure from my property within 90 days at their own expense. The ruling was public record. Kendra Mills published a third article within 48 hours. This one ran on the front page of the regional section. It was the most detailed piece she had written. She covered the ruling thoroughly. She named the board minutes. She named the damages figure. She named Richard Thorne as board president throughout the period in question. The community reaction inside Maplewood Estates was significant. Gary PCL told me that Thorne resigned from the board presidency 4 days after the ruling was published. He did not issue a public statement. He simply submitted his resignation by email and stopped responding to community communications. 3 other board members who had served during the relevant period announced they would not seek reappointment at the next election cycle. The HOA held an emergency general meeting 2 weeks after the ruling. A new interim board was elected from among the homeowner volunteers who had been asking questions at the previous meeting. Paul, the homeowner who had stood up and read the board minutes aloud, was elected interim president by a significant margin. Paul called me personally the week after his election. He was direct and businesslike. He said the new board intended to honor the court ruling fully and without further legal challenge. He said they were exploring alternative water source options, including connection to the county municipal water system. He said the process would take time and money, but that the community understood it was necessary. He thanked me for my patience throughout the process. I told him I appreciated the call. The infrastructure removal was completed on schedule. A licensed contractor hired by the HOA came out on a Tuesday and spent the better part of a day disconnecting the pipe, capping the wellhead access point on their side, and removing all buried tubing from my property. Gerald came back out to confirm the boundary was clean. He certified it in writing. I added his certification to the binder. Final entry. The damages payment arrived by wire transfer on the last business day of the following month. Patricia confirmed receipt. She sent me a closing letter summarizing the outcome. I filed it in the back of Volume 2. I want to say something plainly before this ends. I did not come to that land looking for a fight. I came looking for quiet. I came because I had worked for 23 years in a field that required precision and patience, and I wanted to apply those same qualities to something that was entirely my own. When Gerald found that pipe on the 3rd day of the survey, I did not feel angry. I felt the way I always feel when I find an engineering problem. Focused, methodical, ready to understand it fully before touching anything. That instinct to document before acting, to understand before deciding to build a record before making a claim, is not a legal strategy. It is just how careful people move through the world. It turns out, it is also how you win. Richard Thorne had assumed that possession was enough. That 11 years of uncontested use would protect the HOA from accountability. What he did not account for was a new owner who surveyed his land in the first 2 weeks, who kept a daily log, who hired the right professionals, who let the law work at its own pace without interference. The law does not reward arrogance. It does not punish patience. It follows evidence, and evidence follows whoever takes the time to create it carefully. I still walk that western boundary most mornings. The oak trees are the same. The wellhead is still there, capped and quiet. The pipe is gone. The boundary is clean. Dale Harmon's land.